Freehold is a returning dungeon and fan favourite from Battle for Azeroth that Blizzard have brought back for Season 2 of Mythic Plus in Dragonflight. This dungeon starts with a 31-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. As you start the key, you'll notice the first boss flying around the area and dropping some green poop on you and your friends, so be sure to avoid standing in this as it will deal ticking damage to you but also slow you by 40%. But before engaging the first boss, you'll find 6 different types of mobs. You'll encounter Iron-Tide Enforcers that have a frontal cone ability, brutal backhand that you'll want to avoid as it deals big physical damage and knocks players back. They also have a tank ability called Shattering Toss that will toss the tank away at another player and also drop threat from the tank, so be ready to taunt the mob back if needed. The Iron-Tide Mastiffs will reduce your tank's movement speed by 50% with crippling bite and also deal big tank damage, especially if their enrage isn't soothed. Soothed classes keep an eye out for the Bestial Wrath buff they cast on themselves. More tank damage comes from the Iron-Tide Coursers that will jump behind your tank and use Poisoning Strike, which deals nature damage and also applies a 12-second dot that can stack. You can stun the enemies just before the dot times out here to prevent them from reapplying it or just dispel it if possible. You'll find crack shots that typically will stay out of the group and shoot random targets. Tanks should try and stack the rest of the mobs on top of these so that they can be cleaved down. They will also mark the location of a random player and throw an Azerite grenade to the marked location. This will deal big damage, so avoid the targeted zone. Bone Swords will hit the tank with Filthy Blade that deals damage and applies a stacking healing reduction disease, so make sure to get the spells on this, but if you can't, make sure not to pull too many of these at once. They also have a healing balm cast which needs to be kicked, otherwise it will heal the trash mob massively if not interrupted or dispelled. Upon reaching the first boss arena, you will have to pull the pack at the entrance consisting of 2 enforcers and mastiffs to actually activate the first boss, so again watch out for those backhands. The first boss in Freehold, Skycap'n Kragg. This is a 2-phase encounter that changes at 75% boss health, where he will jump off his mount and fight you on foot, while Sharkbait the Parrot bombards the area with more poop. When Kragg casts Charge, you'll want to make sure you move away from the targeted zone. If you're hit by it, you will likely die on higher keys and also be knocked back. He will also target random players with Pistol Shot, which used to scale very hard, so be prepared to heal up players affected by this. In the second phase, like I mentioned, the Parrot will start bombarding the area, so dodge the swirlies, but it will also now cast Dive Bomb. Sharkbait will swoop down to one edge of the encounter and charge across in a straight line, so again make sure you dodge this, otherwise you'll likely be one-shot. Kragg will no longer use his Charge or Pistol Shot ability, so we don't have to worry about them, but he now gains access to Azerite Powder Shot, randomly selecting a player and shooting out a 60-yard cone of Azerite powder and applying a dot that can be dispelled. To minimize damage here, you'll want your group to spread out around the boss to reduce the chance of multiple players being hit. The captain will also cast Revitalizing Brew, healing him increasingly over 5 seconds, so be ready to kick this as soon as he starts chugging. After defeating the first boss, you'll jump down and get ready to cross the bridge over to the town. There is an enforcer in front of the bridge, so DPS him down while you kite him across. On the other side of the bridge, you'll encounter many new different types of mobs. Cutwater Duelists will mark the location of a random player and cast Duelist Dash. After 2 seconds, they'll charge to the location and deal damage and stun all players caught in the charge. Don't get caught. You'll fight Horsemen who will cause zones to appear underneath each player if their Sea Spout cast isn't stopped. These zones will detonate shortly after spawning, dealing damage and knocking players up. Vermin Trappers will patrol this area and throw out rat traps at each player once engaged. If you do get caught in the trap, it will root you and deal big ticking damage, so be sure to dodge all of them. The trappers are usually surrounded by soggy ship rats. They'll apply a stacking healing received reduction debuff to their target that lasts 8 seconds called Scabrous Bite. Kill these smallies as fast as you can so the debuff doesn't stack too high on your tank. When fighting knife jugglers, you'll want to remain spread by at least 8 yards if possible to ensure that no excess damage is taken when they cast Ricocheting Throw. Here you'll also find a solo Brine Scale that will spam cast Water Bolt and more notably will occasionally cast Frost Blast. You want to interrupt this at all costs as it does massive AoE frost damage to anyone within 40 yards. Bilgerat Buccaneers will channel Going Bananas, a Blade Storm-like ability that you'll need to stand out of unless you can land a hard CC on it like a stun. Freehold has recently been updated to where you no longer need to join a crew to engage with the Council of Captains, and for Season 2 you will always be facing Raoul and Eudora, having Jolly as your ally. He'll give you a large movement speed increase for 10 seconds, which makes dodging Grape Shot a lot easier. During the fight, brews will be thrown from the bartender at the side. If you or the boss are stood within the targeted zone, you will drink the brew that's thrown. 2 of them are buffs that you'll want to pick up immediately as they will boost your crit and haste by a large amount. But he will also throw a caustic brew that will debuff you with a dot, so you'll want to try and position the boss in these landing zones if possible. I'd advise getting a player in your party to keep the bartender on focus to see which brew is being thrown. Captain Ravel will cast Blackout Barrel on a random non-tank player, placing a barrel on their head. DPS will quickly want to swap and nuke down this barrel, as the player affected will be disoriented for its duration. Ravel will also cast Barrel Smash on the ground around him, which players will want to avoid as it hurts and knocks you back. Captain Eudora will spam cast Powder Shot at random players, which your healer will have to deal with as it's unavoidable. She will also cast Grape Shot, where she will leap out and start a series of frontal cone shots, which will always start from her left to right. You'll want to avoid these shots and remember that staying close to her will make dodging this a lot easier. After defeating the second boss, you'll continue over to the Ring of Booty. Harpooners will cast Dragging Harpoon at random rage players, dealing damage and dragging the target towards the harpooner. If you let it drag you in, just make sure you're not being dragged into a big swirly like the Iron Tide Crusher's Ground Shatter ability. When he casts this, all players within 9 yards will take a burst of damage and be knocked back. He will also cast Boulder Throw, marking an area under a group member that will stun you and deal big damage if you're still stood in it. You'll also encounter Scrappers that will cast Blind Rage on random members of your party, which will make them fixate on you for 8 seconds and deal 50% increased physical damage. This fixate can be soothed but also kited and CC'd, as you won't want to let them close the distance and one-shot you. Once you make it over to the Ring of Booty, you'll have to do quite a bit of RP. The first phase, you'll have to catch the pig 3 times before you are actually successful and can continue on into the next phase. Here you'll have to defeat Ludwig. He repeatedly casts Shell Bounce throughout the encounter, sending out a shell that continuously bounces off walls, so be sure to dodge these. This becomes increasingly difficult as the fight goes on, and remember this guy scales with Fortified. For phase 3 of the Ring of Booty, you'll have to defeat Trothak. He will hit a random player in melee and apply a 12-second dot via Ripper Punch. This can't be avoided, so your healer should make sure that all melee players are kept healthy. Melee players will also have to move away from the boss when he channels Shark Tornado. This deals heavy damage to anyone within 9 yards of the boss for 6 seconds. Ranged players will have to deal with his Shark Toss ability. Trothak will throw a shark at a randomly selected ranged player, which will then chase the nearest player. This shark deals damage to all players within 5 yards of it, but can be kited away from melee and into the blood puddles on the ground. Here the shark will become distracted as it consumes the patch and then becomes immobile for 3 seconds. These puddles spawn randomly during the encounter and will slow anyone by 50% if stood in them. This shark will remain active until Trothak casts Rearm, at which point he will charge the shark and pick it up, dealing big damage to anyone in his path. Note that there can be up to 2 sharks active at any given time, so players should prioritize kiting them into the puddles to play it safe. After defeating the Ring of Booty, you'll have to backtrack a little bit and cross the rope bridge to the final area. You'll want to make sure you kill most of the trash here before engaging the last boss to make sure you have enough space. Officers will cast Oiled Blade on your tank, dealing a large burst of magic damage and applying an 8-second magic debuff. This reduces all healing taken by 75% and should be dispelled ASAP. Ravagers have an interruptible cast named Painful Motivation. This cast will buff enemies within 10 yards, increasing their damage by 50%. However, this cast will also inflict damage to those affected by the buff, so more confident groups should let this cast go through and deal with the extra incoming damage. Aside from spamming Lightning Bolt, Stormcallers will also channel Thundering Squall, an interruptible channel that deals substantial damage to anyone in the circle. You definitely want to interrupt this cast, as it will force your group out of the circle and unable to cleave the Stormcallers down. Buccaneers channel Blade Barrage, dealing damage to anyone in the 4-yard frontal cone, so everybody should be sure to dodge this, including the tanks. After this area is cleared, you can go ahead and engage the last boss. When Harlan casts Cannon Barrage on you, you'll want to step away from the group and keep moving for the duration of the debuff so you don't get hit by the swirlies. It will spawn patches that last for a long time and deal heavy ticking damage to anyone stood in them. Harlan's Swiftwind Saber will fire a saber at the tank, firing out in a straight line, dealing damage and knocking you back if hit. Throughout the fight, Grenadiers will spawn by the big piles of gold and fixate a player with a black powder bomb. You'll want to use CC to keep them from closing the gap, otherwise it's lights out for that player. Once Harlan reaches 60%, he'll buff himself and now Cannon Barrage will be applied to all non-tank players. Make sure that you don't cut or corner each other off. Swiftwind Saber will now also spawn 5 sets of blades, making it much harder to dodge. On top of this, multiple Grenadiers will spawn, so keep them CC'd as best you can. At 30% health, he buffs himself even further with 100% attack speed, as well as his signature abilities casting more frequently. However, in this phase he also takes 100% extra damage, so you'll want to save your big cooldowns across your group for this part of the encounter to close out the fight as quickly and as safely as possible. But that's all you need to know for this encounter, and that wraps up Freehold in Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.